The recipe, guaranteed to destroy life on Earth, is really quite simple. And it's probably not what you think. First, you must enforce inequality. Institute capitalism to keep the poor, poor. In addition to hiring mercenaries called by other names, this is an excellent enforcement measure. Teach the young that slavery really is freedom and that it's worth fighting for. That's not hard. Formal public education is actually designed to numb the mind, to stop critical thinking. Then add in that magical elixir called fractional reserve banking. Fractional reserve banking may make cats sad, but it makes the fat cats very happy indeed. Did you know that monopoly was invented to teach people how capitalism ends? Remember, only one person wins. All the rest lose everything. And there you have it, the complete recipe for the destruction of life on Earth. Here's how fractional reserve banking works. Lesson 1 on why it is so destructive. First, come up with $1 million and open a bank. Now, loan out $9 million that you don't have. It's like magic. You may not lend the money you have. That would be called cheating. You may only lend money you don't have. That's called not cheating. Banks magically invent money into pretend existence, but they only invent the principle into pretend existence. The interest they charge for borrowing their, nothing? Well, that is never magically invented into pretend existence. That means that the interest that is due was never funded. It was never turned into pretend money like the principal was. It is unfunded debt. And here's why that matters. Let's say you want to buy a house, so you go out looking and you find the perfect one. A $200,000 30-year fixed mortgage at 4.25% APR is $1,413 a month before taxes. That'll cost you an additional $309,000 in unfunded interest that is also due. That's far more than enough for another house. Have you financed a car? How much must you pay in unfunded interest for that? Do you have student loan debt? That includes unfunded interest as well. Here's a biggie: credit card debt. Pay the minimum payment and $5,000 turns into $25,000 of unfunded interest. This brings up a very important question. If all of that interest doesn't exist because it was never circulated into pretend existence, how will you pay it? You have only two fundamental choices. You can borrow it, with additional unfunded interest added, of course. Or you can steal it, or work for a company that does. These companies inflict grotesque human rights abuses on the most vulnerable. One way of stealing is conning or taking advantage of others, or working for a company that does. The poor and the ignorant are the best targets. You might not think that you do this, but think again. Those who take advantage of slavery are stealing the lives of others. Let's take a peek at our own history. Slavery in the United States would have died a quick and natural death if people refused to buy the cheaper goods made by slaves. Owning a slave would have quickly become cost prohibitive because there was no profit to be made in owning them. Feeding, clothing, and housing slaves would make them too expensive if they didn't turn a profit. Whether the fine cotton fabrics were made in air-polluting textile mills in New England or Britain, using preposterous and cheap child labor, with children working long hours in hazardous conditions, causing injuries and brown lung. People who professed that slavery is a great evil still bought the fabrics, tobacco, sugar, and other things made more affordable by slave labor. Then they went to church to profess their innocence in the whole affair, while expressing outrage at the whole system of slavery. Understand that in the rural areas of early America, small farmers grew and harvested their own cotton and hemp, spun their own thread, wove the thread into cloth, and made their own clothes. It was called freedom and part of a respectable lifestyle. Like our predecessors who profited from slave labor, whether directly or indirectly, we don't want to look at the whole of what we are buying as we buy our own goods, made cheaper because of atrocities like this, along with destruction of our environment. For example, the money we save with our cheaper purchases today are also made possible through slavery, neo-slavery, virtual slavery, theft, torture, murder, war, oppression, rape, and destruction of our natural resources on a scale unimaginable for any sane person. Do you like affordable technology? You know, computers, game consoles, smartphones, and the like. Their prices include grotesque human rights abuses, and that's what makes them so affordable. Because peaceful Africans were forced out of their hunter-gatherer lifestyles and forced to adopt our mercantile system, their now real need for money, combined with our endless desire for cheap technology, puts young children like this to the task of pounding rocks all day to extract cobalt without earning enough to feed himself for the day. Whole families are forced into virtual slavery in order to come up with the money that is only pretend in the first place. It keeps the civil war raging in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Millions of civilians have died to date, roughly half of whom are children under 5. Children are forcefully conscripted to fight in competing armies. Girls are kidnapped and sold as sex slaves or sold as child brides. The going price is about $10. What kind of animal actually takes a souvenir picture as a child cries in shame and horror while semen rolls down her painfully chained breasts? That's part of why these goods are so cheap. Villages once thrived in places like this. Then villagers were force-marched to places with no farmable land or safe drinking water because minerals from Africa are in such demand. Perhaps you'll be kind enough to remember this partial list of atrocities next time you want to upgrade your smartphone or buy anything that requires lithium-ion batteries. When the raw materials are shipped off to China, you can add in more human rights abuses and threats to all life on Earth. Start with more neo-slavery. Workers are housed in chain factories, 16 to a dorm room, working as many as 16 hours a day for only cents a day, doing repetitive work that causes carpal tunnel. A photo of the exact sweatshop the following report speaks of is not available. A recent report by the National Labor Committee asserts that 16 and 17-year-olds were working 15-hour shifts in crowded conditions. 1,000 workers in a 105 by 105-foot space without air conditioning unless inspectors were known to be coming that day. These workers are a typical example of what happens throughout the tech industry, no matter the brand. In one Chinese factory that makes Microsoft mice and controllers for the Xbox, workers are paid 59 cents a day for those long shifts, while Bill Gates' net worth increased by $15 billion in 2014 alone. In April of 2014, his net worth was over $80 billion. Virtual slavery and neo-slavery also translate into more poverty for more people. And our desire for more stuff made at their expense translates into some of the worst pollution on Earth, which, by the way, is a sphere, so it doesn't just stay there. The oceans are doing their best to absorb all of that pollution, but they have reached their limit. Air pollution is turning the oceans acidic, killing the plankton and krill, the base of the food chain. In some parts of the ocean, 80% of the krill are missing. We are destroying the only Earth we have because we need to come up with enough pretend money to pay the unfunded interest on our pretend debts. This reinforces the greed that is built into capitalism's structure, and it reinforces an abominable code of ethics. Now let's talk about our cheap clothes. There are the all-too-frequent fires where workers are trapped in buildings.
Officials in Bangladesh said the flames spread rapidly on the ground floor, trapping those on high...
Then there is the problem with pollution, both air and water.
Untreated waste from dyeing and washing processes flows freely from the factories, and that's not the only thing going straight into this river.
Remember, rivers flow to the sea. And there, as in America, jobs are more important than people and the rest of life on Earth, even though when we destroy the Earth there will be no jobs because there will be no people. That's built into the price of our cheap clothes as well.
Bangladesh might be one of the wettest countries in the world, but a lack of funds means the supply network is dilapidated. Factories often get priority over people, and as the textiles industry uses more and more water, an increasing number of people don't have access.
Then there are the building collapses because companies disregard safety. When someone's limb is amputated at the scene to get her out of the rubble, she is no longer employable, and there is no social safety net to provide for her and her family. Workers attempting to organize for better working conditions are often brutally beaten. Given all of this, why aren't old and patched clothes considered a badge of honor rather than a mark of shame? They were a badge of honor for the hippies, plus they were an art form. How can our values be so warped? And that's just the textile industry. How about chocolate? Slavery, neo-slavery, and virtual slavery through debt bondage are common in the industry. No education for these African kids. Speaking of chocolate, meet Mr. Chocolate himself. This is Peter Brabeck, the CEO of Nestle Corporation. His annual compensation is nearly $2 million in salary plus bonus and nearly $5 million in stock awards. Let's hear what he has to say.
Wenn Sie sich erinnern können. Also Wasser ist natürlich das wichtigste Rohmaterial, das wir heute noch auf der Welt haben. Es geht darum, ob wir die normale Wasserversorgung der Bevölkerung privatisieren oder nicht. Und da gibt es zwei verschiedene Anschauungen. Die eine Anschauung, extrem würde ich sagen, wird von einigen von den NGOs vertreten, die darauf pochen, dass Wasser zu einem öffentlichen Recht erklärt wird. Das heißt, als Mensch sollten Sie einfach Recht haben, um Wasser zu haben. Das ist die eine Extremlösung. Ja? Und die andere, die sagt, Wasser ist ein Lebensmittel, so wie jedes andere Lebensmittel, sollte das einen Marktwert haben. Ich persönlich glaube, es ist besser, man gibt einem Lebensmittel einen Wert, sodass wir alle bewusst sind, dass das etwas kostet.
Then, in the same interview, after explaining about how CEO's most important social responsibility is to preserve and grow the company to create jobs, he proceeds to walk the interviewer to a video display that shows how wonderful his factories are without people.
With any product, the final
It might really be
quality depends on consumer satisfaction.
modern diese Fabriken sind, hochrobotisiert,
Consumers appreciate the
fast keine Leute.
of the new Nescafe and prefer to any other commercial product.
Remember, only one person can win. All the rest, including the cats, whether feline or fat, lose everything. And then there are diamonds. Ah yes, diamonds, a girl's best friend. It would take too long to show all the abuses in the diamond industry, so I'll just show one. Hands, legs, arms, and feet are often amputated with dirty axes or machetes as an example, to convince villagers to become slaves in the diamond mines. How about palm oil? Most people have never heard of it. It's found in virtually everything from food and household products to makeup and other cosmetics. It's also being considered as an alternative to natural fossil fuels, even though it's still carbon-based. This too comes with slavery, neo-slavery, and deforestation, which means loss of natural habitats, so that we can eat junk food and have fancy soaps and cosmetics. Cashews from Vietnam, anyone? Drug users become slave labor, complete with torture and beatings, with shelling of the nuts causing carpal tunnel. Today it is virtually impossible to buy anything without grotesque abuses to all of life being a part of the purchase price. Meanwhile, what are these guys doing? If we stop allowing those imports into the country, wouldn't that mean more jobs at home? Well, the answer to that is both yes and no. In the short term, it would create more jobs, but prices would escalate so much and so quickly that you won't be able to earn the money you now save by buying cheaper slave-made goods that destroy the earth so that you can pay the unfunded interest on the pretend debt that was circulated into pretend existence. Besides, that would piss off Wall Street, and all those lovely campaign donations would dry up. And the government has its own problem with unfunded interest that is due on the pretended into existence national debt. As of January 2017, the national debt was almost $20 trillion and counting. And that doesn't even include the unfunded interest that is also due, $250 billion per year and counting. Nor does it include over $600 trillion in potential debt. Credit derivatives, also known as credit default swaps, are a key component of the 2008 crash. These are unfunded insurance policies that taxpayers will be asked to fund during the next guaranteed crash. That number is low, since right before President Obama left office, he gave the Blackstone Group a gift of taxpayer-funded guarantees of its potential losses in the rental market. Why aren't all local landlords entitled to that same gift? Because these guys are afraid to ask the taxpayers to give the banks more unpopular bailouts, the Fed has started counterfeiting money to get it to them. The Fed is buying banks' bad debts that they knew were bad when they made the loans, which necessitated the invention of the credit default swaps in the first place. It puts profit back into the banks, which is always good for an extra special bonus for the executives. It's called quantitative easing, and it is outright theft, because it causes inflation as those at the top raise prices and increase their pay to collect that counterfeited money, which is why the cost of food has gone up so much of late. Have you ever wondered, how big is a trillion? 1 trillion seconds is almost 32,000 years. Now, multiply that times 667 trillion that we owe and potentially owe, and we run out of the ability to do the math, because time didn't exist in our universe until about 13.9 billion years ago when it was born. 1 trillion is a really, really big number. How are these guys going to pay the pretend principal and the unfunded pretend interest that is due on our massive pretended into existence national debt? Government has the same two fundamental choices that you do. It can borrow it, with additional unfunded interest added, of course, or it can steal it. We are stealing when we go to war to steal another country's oil at the behest of oil companies. Running out of bombs is okay, though. Making more bombs rather than fixing problems at home is much more lucrative. It benefits Wall Street. It grows the economy faster, and the economy must grow to pay the unfunded interest on the national debt that was pretended into existence for the benefit of the bankers on Wall Street. We are now bombing 7 countries. We funded and armed the terrorists that we were told were rebels in a civil war, which it wasn't. We were never told that we joined forces in Saudi Arabia's religious war against the secular democratic state of Syria. But the reason why we did this is clear. We wanted to control the oil markets to protect our uneconomic system. This uneconomic system is so corrupt that it allows multinational oil companies to tax-deduct contributions to political super PACs in exchange for favorable legislation. It's legalized bribery. We also intentionally impoverish other nations to bring them under our thumb and force them to play by our rules, which are necessary because of our debt-funded money system. The scheme is to lend them money for projects that they are told will benefit the people. Then when the country goes bankrupt, as they know it must because the debts are unsustainable, we take over the natural resources and effective control of their governments. We force them into debt bondage. It's the same scheme that played out in the mortgage crisis in 2008. Bankers made loans they knew were unpayable, enticed borrowers into debt using lies and fraud, covered their known future losses on paper using unfunded credit default swaps, paid rating agencies for higher ratings than deserved, and then forced the people to pay for their knowingly preventable losses through what we call bailouts. The Blackstone Group, mentioned earlier, then bought up foreclosed properties at fire sale prices and rented them out. Now Blackstone doesn't have to worry about being included in future bailouts because the U.S. taxpayer guarantees its losses. That's what corruption looks like. Meanwhile, here at home, military-style assault forces stand against the Sioux tribe and allies, trying to protect its water source and sacred burial grounds on land guaranteed them by U.S. treaty. Oil companies want a pipeline for the transport of the dirtiest oil on earth to go through that land, and our legislators are more than willing to assist, even though it violates the U.S. Constitution. Though industry experts insist that pipelines are safe, on average, leaks have occurred almost every other day between 2010 and June of 2015. These incidents have killed 80 people, injured 389 more, cost $2.8 billion in damages, and released toxic polluting chemicals in local soil, waterways, and air. Do you remember this Nestle CEO who says that water is not a human right? He also sits on the board of ExxonMobil. Pipelines are great for him. Once the water becomes toxic, he can sell his water to the government and the victims. Nestle is the largest water bottler in the world. We're taking advantage of our own most vulnerable citizens to feed this insanity that is never satiated. The U.S. targets its other minorities to fill prison slave quotas by the for-profit prison industry here in America. Marijuana is now a Schedule I drug, meaning that the government classifies it as being as dangerous as heroin or opium, even though numerous studies by the United States government have said that it should be regulated and treated like alcohol. The story of that will appear in a later video. We spend billions to grow violence in the failed war on drugs that kills hundreds of millions of innocents because wars, no matter the enemy, are profitable for Wall Street. 90 million deaths, and that's just Mexico. The war on drugs is a global war. And that's just for starters. This brings us to the first con against every lower-class American. The Constitution gives Congress the authority to coin money. The 10th Amendment says that Congress has no power unless the Constitution grants it that power. In spite of that prohibition, Congress unconstitutionally granted a national charter for the establishment of a private bank. It then, also unconstitutionally, gave the bank a monopoly on creating money, turning debt into what we today call money. It's called debt-funded currency. In the early days, currency was backed by gold or silver coins. You could exchange your bills for coinage of value. This is a copy of a bill that promises that it can be exchanged for $2 in coins. Congress could issue currency backed by something tangible and valuable, called specie. Instead, it issues bonds. It costs as much to create a dollar bill as it does to create a dollar bond. That which gives the dollar bill its perceived value is the same thing that gives the dollar bond its perceived value. The difference is the bondholders are paid a profit for buying the bonds, whereas those who buy dollar bills in exchange for their labor receive no profit. In fact, some of the dollars that we buy in exchange for our labor is subtracted from our wages in order to pay the bondholders their $250 billion and growing in unfunded interest that, because of this dishonest scheme, is due. Their money grows while our money shrinks. This scheme was America's first welfare for the wealthy. And, outside of counterfeiting, because the only way that money comes into circulation is through issuance of debt, the dollars in your pocket represent fractions of that debt. Money is debt, not value. It's actually anti-money. It's not the kind of debt that makes you wealthier. It's the kind of debt that makes you poorer. That welfare for the wealthy is paid by we the people who actually work for the debt that banks issue at the behest of government to keep us in debt bondage. We believe we must pay this extortion to preserve our freedom. In fact, we already lost our freedom when government instituted fractional reserve banking to create this system of debt bondage for the lower classes. It's nothing more than feudalism in disguise. In describing our feudal fiscal system, Adam Smith, who wrote the Bible of our economic policy, Wealth of Nations, called us free slaves, as well as the race of laborers. At some point we simply dropped the word slave from the term free slave, which is how we came to believe that slavery is freedom. Welcome to the advent of George Orwell's 1984. Smith said that free slaves are cheaper than owned slaves. First, there is no major cash outlay to buy them. Plus, when free slaves get sick, they must provide for their own care. And perhaps sickest of all, if you pay free slaves slightly more than required for survival, they will have children, and because of the laws of supply and demand, that will lower the price of labor. Of course, he continued, that means that the majority of these children must die of poverty-related causes, but that's natural, implying that it's God's will. And that explains the intentionally built-in wealth inequality in America. The poor are capitalism's compost, necessary to fertilize the system. But he also warned his wealthy readers, don't let your greed overtake you as you do this, or like the old days of feudalism that came to a crashing end, you too will lose your money, but more important, you will lose your power. Today, not only are there too many people, but there are too many poor people. In their minds, the poor, rather than their own greed, threatens the system that is teetering on the brink of collapse. But that's okay, because the easiest way to grow the economy, to come up with the pretend principle, plus the unfunded interest, is to wage incessant wars, because wars are profitable. Plus, they kill poor people who have no means of escape. Foreign governments that use the same fractional reserve banking system also buy our bonds. Even our enemies. Governments help one another out like that, because it's all a con. As shown before, in the early days of our country, currency could be exchanged for coins made of gold or silver. Abe Lincoln ordered these greenbacks. They were very popular because they weren't debt-funded. Then we came out with gold and silver certificates. They could be exchanged for gold or silver. Today, our currency is backed by, in other words, nothing. Nothing other than faith. Faith that government can keep us ignorant enough to never figure it all out by terrifying us with the threat of economic collapse and depression. We can avoid the consequence of the forthcoming economic collapse with planning. Now imagine reading a work of fiction where those with the most nothing were given privileges and freedoms that those with less nothing cannot have, and leaves people hungry and homeless because of insufficient nothing. Our minds would be twisted into a pretzel. It appears that they already are. And that's the core of our economic system, thanks to fractional reserve banking. It's a scheme designed to make the wealthy appear superior and deserving of political power at the expense of the poor and middle classes, who must remain dependent and functionally uneducated serfs in order to keep the Khan in place. Slave masters and free slave or serf masters always work to keep their slaves ignorant, because the truth sets them free. For as long as we hold on to the false beliefs that free slavery is freedom, never-ending wars keep the peace, and national secrets that keep us ignorant are what keeps us strong and safe, we are no different from those of George Orwell's 1984, who chanted, "Freedom is slavery, war is peace, ignorance is strength." 1984 was supposed to be a warning, but they're using it as an instruction manual. For as long as we can be convinced through indoctrination that this insanity is good for us, we will defend our free slavery from any possible threat of freedom, because we have been intentionally taught to call our free slavery freedom. The choice is ours, and we really do have a choice. This is all fixable, and the power is in our hands, not theirs. The cure begins with us, with our own spending habits. Through them, we must begin to treat others as we would like to be treated. With that many trillions of dollars being withheld from the slave owners, they will capitulate. An economic war is being waged against us. We win by declaring economic peace with our fellow humans and the earth, using our spending habits as our guide. Start with the fashion statement that advertises our commitment to the restoration of sanity. We need to be able to recognize one another. If you can't wear these to work, or you don't yet have these, wear something like a peace symbol. There are more of us around the world than we dare think. We are the 99.99998%. Thank you for watching. Each video in this video series will come to you in 2 parts. The odd-numbered parts, like this, Part 1, will introduce us to more pieces of the puzzle, exposing the insanity that we have been living in. The even-numbered parts, like Part 2, will introduce us to amazing powers that humans have. These are testable powers that have been known to sages throughout the ages, but this knowledge was destroyed in the 4th century by Emperor Theodosius I, who gave us the framework of feudalism. He banned all the pagan religions that used this knowledge. In Part 2 of this Episode 1, you will be given an experiment that actually proves that love is a great power, and we can use that power to heal ourselves and the earth. For more information, please go to AmericanDelusion.org.